The morning began like thousands of pilgrimages before it, ordinary in its intentions, extraordinary in its devotion. 81 souls boarded a worn blue tour bus in the city of Rishikesh before dawn, bound for the mountain shrine of Kedarnath. For many, it was a vow fulfilled after years of waiting. Widows traveling to offer lamps of thanks, students seeking blessings before exams, farmers praying for rain, and one driver whose faith was duty itself. Ravi Joshi wiped the condensation from the windshield with the edge of his sleeve. The sky was still the color of ash, too early for sunlight yet already alive with movement. Vendors shuttering stalls, stray dogs curling in doorways, the faint echo of temple bells across the river. He had driven this route countless times, looping through the Himalayan foothills where the road clings to cliffs like a fragile thread between heaven and earth. The pilgrims filled the air with murmured prayers. Thick garlands of marigold hung from every window. Someone placed a small brass image of Hanuman on the dashboard. The driver bowed slightly before starting the engine. The sound was more than ignition, it was invocation. Modern India waking under monsoon haze. Stay until the end of this journey. Somewhere between reason and faith, something will happen that defies every law we know. The invitation lands early, a promise and a warning. The bus rolled north through a landscape shifting from city to jungle to stone. Mountains rose like sleeping gods in the distance. Rivers cut through them, foaming white against black rock. At every bend, shrines clung to the roadside, tiny red-painted shelters adorned with flowers, incense trailing into mist. Passengers bowed their heads automatically each time they passed one, as though a silent agreement bound them to acknowledge the unseen. Inside, the atmosphere mixed fatigue with devotion. Old women recited verses under their breath. Children dozed against window panes fogged by breath. A man in the middle row fingered prayer beads carved from Rudraksh seeds, counting rhythms of faith older than empires. Only the youngest passengers glanced repeatedly at their phones, trying, without success, to find signal in the valley's depths. Hours into the climb, the air cooled. Monsoon clouds thickened, dropping sudden veils of rain onto the road. Ravi leaned forward, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He knew these turns, knew where the asphalt opened into sheer nothing, where an inch too far would mean an eternity down. To his left, the valley unfurled in silence below, 1,000 feet of emptiness wrapped in fog. To his right, cliffs pressed inward, dripping water like tears down jagged stone. The sound of tires against wet pavement became a heartbeat shared by everyone on board. From time to time, he glanced at the rear-view mirror. Behind him, the passengers swayed slightly with each curve, bodies moving like one organism at prayer. It should have reassured him, yet a weight formed in his chest, a heaviness he couldn't name. The rain thickened into sheets. Headlights struggled against darkness though it was still morning. Somewhere behind them, thunder rolled. Ravi reached for the radio, but static answered. The frequency that always crackled with traffic reports was dead. Then came the sign, a wooden board marking "Got past 12 kilometers." Beyond it, the road narrowed to a single lane carved along a cliff edge. He slowed instinctively. The passengers noticed, voices hushed, prayers resumed. Halfway through that stretch, the first disaster teased them with coincidence. A truck rounded the blind curve ahead, loaded with stone, its brakes screeching. Ravi honked twice, then again. The driver of the truck tried to swerve wide, wheels sliding on the wet surface. Everything after that happened inside a heartbeat and a dream. The truck's side mirror clipped the front of the bus, metal against metal, the sound like a scream tearing the air. Ravi jerked the wheel left to avoid collision, forgetting that left meant cliff. Tires spun, traction vanished. For an instant, they floated, suspended between mountain and void. The world turned weightless. People rose from seats, gravity abandoning them. A suitcase burst open, clothes spinning like frightened birds. Time stretched unbearably. Seconds became corridors wide enough for every life to flash through. The sound of rain vanished, replaced by a sheer, impossible silence. Ravi saw the edge disappearing under his wheels, the steep throat of the valley yawning open. In those final instants of expected death, he did not scream. He thought instead of his wife lighting a lamp that very morning, asking for his safety as she always did. The image filled his eyes as the bus pitched forward into fog. Steel groaned. Glass exploded into harmless glitter. Passengers clutched seats, one another, anything. Weight disappeared entirely. And then, nothing shattered. The fall stopped without warning, halfway between sky and earth. The entire bus hung in open space, untouched by air or rock. It trembled faintly, not dropping, not rising, as though invisible hands cradled it. For a long moment, nobody moved. Breath held, eyes wide, disbelief wrapped around every living soul inside that steel shell. Outside, lightning cleaved the clouds into veins of white. In one flash, through the misted windows, they saw something impossible. A pale halo of light enveloping the bus, soft yet immense, diffusing like mist touched by moonlight. On a ridge across the valley, two shepherds halted mid-step. They saw the same glow floating against the cliff face. One fell to his knees, the other covered his eyes, murmuring ancient words of protection. Back inside, a child whispered the first sound since the fall, a whisper that carried not through ears but through hearts, "Ma, the light." Some said it was reflection. Others, mass hysteria. Yet for those inside, the laws of weight and fear had surrendered to something else entirely. The bus didn't crash. It didn't tumble. It waited. After what felt like forever, gravity seemed to remember them, but gently. The frame began to descend not in a plunge but a slow, trembling slide. The tires brushed rock once, twice, then settled onto a jutting ledge barely wider than the bus itself. A collective gasp filled the cabin. Steel creaked, then stilled. Silence swallowed every voice. Through cracked windows, fog rolled in gentle ribbons. Against every expectation written into human reason, 81 lives remained intact, alive on a band of stone that should never have existed there. Ravi uncurled his fingers from the wheel. They were bloodless, stiff, shaking. Around him people wept, not from pain, but from the immensity of being spared. The marigold garlands still hung above their heads, petals trembling as though moved by unseen wind. When death misses by inches, the human heart begins to hear whatever speaks beyond reason. Some call it coincidence. Others call it God. But in that valley, for those minutes when the earth itself forgot gravity, 81 strangers agreed on one thing. They had been held. The screen fades to black. The sound of rain returns softly, rhythmic, alive, promising that this is only the beginning. For several heart-stopping seconds after the bus touched the ledge, nobody moved. The only sound was metal sighing against rock and the soft hiss of rain returning. Breath by breath, adrenaline drained into disbelief. Fog flowed through shattered windows like pale smoke. Beyond the glass, the abyss waited, bottomless, patient. The ground beneath them was no wider than a country road's shoulder, carved into the cliff centuries ago by hands long vanished. Ravi Joshi loosened his grip from the steering wheel. His palms were cut where glass had bitten him, yet he barely felt pain. His eyes searched for motion among the passengers, faces wet, streaked, alive. Life, unbroken, was the loudest sound imaginable. The first voices rose as whispers. "We're still here." A woman touched her heart, then pressed both palms to the floor as if the stone itself deserved worship. Someone began to cry, not from fear but from the unbearable lightness of still being human after expecting death. Outside, clouds split briefly. A faint shaft of morning sunlight pierced through the fog and struck the bus's roof. In that brief beam they saw what had spared them. The ledge was not random rock. It was flat, almost polished, its surface carved with ancient patterns now blurred by moss. Symbols spiraled outward like petals, forming a perfect circle beneath the tires. No miracle was spoken, Yet everyone felt the same silent conclusion. This was not accident, it was alignment. Ravi opened the door cautiously. The railing gave way to open air. One wrong step would mean an endless fall. Cold wind swept in, scattering papers and petals of the marigold garlands. He stepped onto the ledge with slow reverence, testing the ground. It held firm. He turned to the passengers, voice hoarse. "Stay inside. No one moves near the edge." A few ignored him long enough to peer from the windows. From their vantage point, the world was layers of gray cloud beneath them, as though they sat on the roof of creation. There was no sign of a road, no sign of civilization, only mountains and void. Wet stone underfoot, prayer threads tangled through steel, steam rising from shattered panes. Each image arrests the mind between wonder and fear. They should have died. That knowledge settled slowly, heavier than gravity itself. Ravi searched the bus for radio connection. The frequency spoke only static. Cell phones blinked uselessly. No signal, no rescue. He counted the passengers. 79, 80, 81. Everyone present. Every heartbeat intact. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but echoing through the valley like applause from invisible crowds. Somewhere up the slope above them, unseen shepherds knelt. One began to chant verses he barely remembered from childhood. They had witnessed the impossible, a vehicle hovering mid-air before resting gently, as if laid down by unseen strength. Later, they would tell their families the light was not lightning but golden, shaped like an open hand. At this moment, they only stared, crosses of rain streaking their faces. On the ledge, the wet air carried a faint humming, a resonance that no one could identify. It came from the rock itself, not machine nor engine. Those closest to the ground felt it in their bones. It pulsed once, twice, like the slow heartbeat of the mountain. Then it stopped. Inside, someone fainted. Friends revived her with sips of bottled water. Children huddled together under blankets of discarded shawls. Fear returned, quieter now, transmuted into exhaustion. Not intruding but guiding thought. Moments after a miracle, the hardest reality begins, the need to survive it. Hours passed. The rain lessened to drizzle. Hunger whispered already. Some passengers tried radioing emergency services again, repeating coordinates they didn't know. No answer came. By afternoon, silence had settled thick as dust. Only the wind spoke, joining the slow drip of water from the roof. The bus perched motionless, balanced between miracle and disaster, every breath reminding them how narrow the distance was between both. Ravi remained awake through daylight fading into dusk. His conscience gnawed. If his hand hadn't jerked, none of this would have happened. Yet he also knew the same motion had delivered them onto the only ledge within miles. Which truth was real, the error or the mercy? As night rose from the valley, fog swallowed the world again, and with it came a stillness so deep it felt sacred. Far below, hidden by clouds, waterfalls muttered eternal hymns. Above, stars appeared faintly between shreds of cloud. One by one, pilgrims closed their eyes, not in despair, but in a kind of suspended faith. Ravi sat upright in the driver's seat, his silhouette framed against dim starlight through the cracked windshield. Outside, faintly visible in the fog, that same impossible glow pulsed once more on the surface of the cliff, like a breath taken by the mountain itself before returning to sleep. That night, the survivors of God's Valley learned that silence can be louder than thunder, and that sometimes, what saves us refuses to explain itself. Dawn broke without warmth. Fog clung to the cliff like wool soaked in silver, veiling both the ledge and the abyss below. From the bus, the passengers awoke not refreshed but disoriented, as if they'd slept inside a dream refusing to end. Ravi Joshi stepped outside first. The air bit his skin. Mist carried the bite of ice melting high above. The horizon offered no clue of direction. Clouds fused sky and land into one endless gray. He turned slowly, realizing that their ledge, miraculous as it was, had no visible path out. One side met the mountain wall, sheer and vertical, the other dropped into forever. The pilgrims emerged cautiously, guided by instinct rather than command. Many dropped to their knees, touching the stone. Someone began to chant Aum Namah Shivaya, the sound trembling through the mist, picked up by other voices until it filled the air like resonance from the mountain itself. As sunlight filtered weakly through clouds, they could see the marks more clearly, the same circular carvings glimpsed the night before. The ledge wasn't random rock formation. It was shaped. Centuries of wind and rain had not erased the symmetry of a lotus etched into the stone, its center precisely beneath the bus. An elderly teacher named Gopal pressed his hand against one petal's groove. He whispered the word mandala. The pattern formed a protective circle humankind rarely carves by accident. Even those who did not understand symbols felt their meaning. They had not landed at the brink of death but on sacred ground. Legends once told of hermits who meditated in air so thin only prayer could breathe it. None imagined their shrines still stood, waiting for new witnesses. By mid-morning the fog thinned enough to reveal the chasm fully. The drop was dizzying. Thousands of feet of stone, forest, and invisible river. The road they'd fallen from was out of sight entirely, erased by curve and cloud. Ravi calculated the slope with his eyes, searching for any climbable escape. None existed. Even if rescue teams were searching above, they'd never glimpse the ledge beneath this curtain of vapor. He returned to the bus, checked supplies. 9 bottles of water. 4 packets of biscuits. 2 thermos flasks of tea. That was all. The passengers gathered, quiet. Hunger settled like a second fog. The young shared food with elders. A little girl tore biscuits in half so everyone could have something. No one quarreled. Fear had softened into cooperation, as though the manner of their survival demanded reverence more than panic. As the day aged, the ledge warmed slightly. From somewhere inside the cliffs came the murmur of hidden water, a spring perhaps, seeping through cracks. Those nearest placed containers beneath it, catching droplets in patience. Late afternoon brought signs of life, or so they thought. Across the gorge, on a facing cliff several hundred meters away, shapes moved. At first it looked like wind through shrubs. Then a figure appeared, small, robed in saffron, standing at the edge with a staff raised above his head. Behind him, 2 others followed, their forms dissolving and reappearing through vapor. For a heartbeat, every survivor froze. Were these hallucinations shaped by exhaustion, or people real and alive? The figures lifted their hands together, forming a gesture of blessing. Then they disappeared into fog, leaving only the memory of color against the gray. Evening crept over the mountains. The temperature dropped. People huddled inside the bus again, wrapping shawls and torn curtains around their shoulders. Children slept in clusters for warmth. Ravi remained awake outside, staring across the valley, waiting for the orange robes to return. Eventually, he saw a different light, tiny, flickering, far away on the opposite slope. A flame, steady despite wind. Another flame followed, then another. Not headlights. Lanterns. In ancient valleys, light travels faster than sound between souls that believe. Whether born of faith or chance, that faint glow became the first promise that heaven had not finished its work. He whispered to himself, almost afraid to speak the hope aloud. Rescue must exist. Someone had seen them. Somewhere across this abyss, life was stirring toward them. Ravi stepped back into the bus, whispering, "Hold on. Morning will come again." But as he closed the door, the camera lingers on his hand resting against cold steel, steady outside, shaking inside, while beyond the glass, 3 small lanterns burn across emptiness, their reflection trembling in his eyes. In the Valley of the Gods, hope appeared not as thunder or miracle, but as a distant flame whispering that the impossible was not yet over. The morning came quietly, gray and cold, with no sun to declare its arrival. The valley was a world of mist and echo. Even the survivors' breathing seemed muffled, as if sound itself were afraid to fall. Ravi Joshi stepped out from the bus. The ledge beneath him glistened with dew, barely visible beyond 3 feet. Across the abyss, the lights that had burned through the fog the night before were gone. Had they been real? He could not tell. Yet the memory of their glow refused to leave his mind, the first proof that someone might have seen them, or something greater had. He turned back to the passengers still huddled together under worn blankets. The first murmurs of despair floated in the air. Water was almost finished, food gone. Children whimpered softly, their mothers shushing them with empty reassurances. When the adrenaline of survival fades, silence becomes the second enemy. By noon, clouds thinned just enough to reveal flashes of the world below. Sharp cliffs, waterfalls glinting far beneath, and the broken ribbon of the road where they should have died. The sight brought both wonder and regret. They had survived, yes, but on a trap of stone that could collapse with one wrong prayer. Then, as if the mountain meant to remind them of its power, a tremor shuddered through the ledge. Gravel slid. A slab of rock sheared off, falling into endless white. Screams rippled through the bus. The vehicle shifted half a meter, groaned, then stilled. Dust filled the air, scaling throats and eyes. When it cleared, something new stood beside them, a cavity revealed by the fallen stone. Within it, a small statue sat carved from the same rock, weather-smoothed yet unmistakably human, a monk in meditation, eyes half closed, hands resting in serenity. Every sound halted. The woman nearest whispered the first clear words in hours. He was waiting here. For reasons no one could explain, calm spread. The image seemed neither miracle nor coincidence, only presence. Even the children stopped crying. Several pilgrims laid petals from broken garlands at its feet. Dust still drifted through sunlight, glowing like incense smoke around the carved face. When fear breaks, faith often seeps through the cracks. Ravi knelt briefly, not to worship but to breathe. The statue's unmoving eyes mirrored his own exhaustion and, strangely, his hope. The cliff had taken, then given. Moments later, someone gasped and pointed across the abyss. Through the thinning veil of fog, a line of orange flickers pulsed, moving flames, small and steady. Lanterns. Ravi climbed atop the bus roof despite its tilt. Against the swelling fog, he saw them clearly now. 3 figures in saffron robes winding along a narrow path, each carrying light. For an instant, time stretched between the 2 cliffs, peril separated from salvation by distance alone. He climbed down, voice trembling not with fear but relief. "Help is coming," he whispered. Inside, no one applauded. Instead, a low wave of prayer moved among them, repeating gratitude in languages that overlapped into melody. Outside, the statue glowed faintly in the waning sun. The ledge had stopped shaking. Clouds drifted upward, revealing brief patches of blue. Between prayer and panic, they found a thin thread of faith, and against every rule of the mountain, that thread was beginning to pull them toward rescue. By morning, the fog loosened its grip on the cliffs. The first colors of dawn spilled across the peaks, pale amber on steel-gray stone. For the first time since the fall, the survivors saw the full shape of their prison, a slim balcony of rock carved cleanly into the mountainside, unreachable by road, invisible from the sky. Then, through the fresh light, movement appeared on the opposite slope. 3 figures advanced slowly, wrapped in robes the color of flame. Their pace was unhurried, each step measured as though rehearsed through centuries. In their hands, long staffs struck the ground in rhythm. Behind them, strips of prayer cloth fluttered from their belts like banners of wind. It took time for the stranded pilgrims to believe their eyes. Even Ravi Joshi doubted at first. The figures were too calm, too precise to belong to this world of panic. Yet as they drew closer, the details took shape. Faces weather-worn, feet bare on stone, eyes luminous with focus. Monks. The first voice to reach them carried across the gorge, hollow but clear. "Stay where you are. The path will come." Those 5 words, simple as breath, cut through exhaustion like sunlight. In them lay an instruction and a promise. The monks worked ropes into rock crevices, driving wooden stakes, tying passage lines across an ancient path long hidden under vines and moss. Every motion was deliberate, part prayer, part physics. By noon, they had spanned half the gulf separating the ledge from salvation. The wind battered them hard, whipping saffron robes into arcs of motion that blurred against gray stone. From below, the survivors watched in collective silence, torn between awe and terror. One mistake, one loose knot, and the rescuers would share their fate. Then, with graceful precision, one monk reached their side. His face was lean, eyes calm as still water. Without a word, he knelt to test the rock. He smiled faintly, murmured something only the mountain could hear, and beckoned for a rope. Ravi moved first, helping fasten the line. The monk's grip was strong yet gentle, his wrists beaded with simple wooden rosaries. Around his neck hung a small copper bell that chimed softly every time he moved, its sound almost human, like a heartbeat that belonged to everyone at once. Within an hour, a series of ropes connected both sides of the chasm, anchored high above to iron loops invisible in the distance. The monks had known this pass all along. Rumor said their monastery carved into the opposite wall had stood abandoned for 100 years, but now proof breathed before them. The evacuation began quietly. One by one, the weakest were harnessed and led across the narrow path. Wind clawed at them, but the ropes held. Children closed their eyes, clutching sacred beads. Mothers followed, whispering hymns to drown out fear. Each crossing took minutes that felt eternal. When Ravi was the last left on the ledge, he paused, hand resting on the cracked door of the bus that had almost become his coffin. He whispered a single sentence, only lets the sound fade into wind. Then he followed the monk across the rope bridge. Midway, he looked down. The void swirled beneath him, endless cloud. And yet, for the first time since the accident, he felt no vertigo. The light seemed to hold him, just as it had held the bus days earlier. On the far side, the monks bowed briefly as each survivor stepped onto solid ground. No applause, no celebration, only relief that expressed itself as silence. Behind them, the unstable ledge cracked once more, collapsing into the valley in a cloud of dust, erasing every trace of where they had hung between life and death. If faith could wear a face, that day it looked like 3 men walking through fog, carrying light and choosing compassion over fear. The rope bridge swayed gently over clouds that swallowed every sound below. When the last pilgrims stepped across, the monks led them through a narrow stone corridor cut directly into the mountain's side. Cold air smelled of cedar and smoke. Then, through an archway, the survivors entered an open courtyard illuminated by firelight. The monastery revealed itself slowly, part cave, part architecture. Bells of bronze hung from wooden beams. Prayer wheels turned in the wind, whispering metal songs into the dusk. Outside, the valley was nothing but a sea of mist. Here, the world felt unmoving, sheltered from time. The monks guided them to sit near the flames. Steam rose from clay pots as they poured water boiled with herbs. Some pilgrims cried just from touching warm cups again. Others stared silently at the carved walls where paint had not yet faded, blue figures dancing among golden clouds, guardians of the storm. Silence had been their prison. Here it became peace. The abbot arrived last, a frail man with eyes like polished stone, carrying no staff, no symbol of rank. He surveyed the group with quiet compassion and said only, "You were laid down softly." His English was sparse, but his meaning infinite. No one dared answer. They listened as the monks unrolled mats, tending to wounds and fatigue. Nothing miraculous happened now, only simple kindness offered with discipline that felt sacred. They distributed rice broth, wrapped shivering shoulders in wool, and said prayers so old their syllables pulsed more than sounded. Ravi Joshi sat apart near an open window cut into stone, watching fog move among the peaks. Everything inside him was torn: relief, guilt, awe. He had driven those people into the air and somehow left them breathing. Consequence and blessing shared the same heartbeat. Footsteps approached. The abbot sat beside him without ceremony. "Are you the driver?" he asked. Ravi nodded, eyes down. "Then you carried more than bodies," said the monk. "You carried prayers you did not know." The words struck softly, dissolving blame before it found a place to rest. He wanted to confess how close he'd come to hopelessness, but the abbot raised a hand. "No confession here, only life returned." Then he rose and left him to silence once more. Night deepened. Lightning flared far beyond the mountains, shaping white outlines of ridges and clouds. The monks prepared altars of butter lamps. Their flames multiplied across the courtyard until the stone glowed like sunrise trapped inside evening. The pilgrims lay in rows under woven blankets. From above, the monastery seemed like a constellation of tiny stars suspended halfway between sky and earth. Wind hummed through the prayer chimes. Some claimed to hear voices in that sound, soft syllables of gratitude carried upward, indistinguishable from the language of the storm. Rescue is rarely the end of survival. It is where the reckoning begins, when the human heart must decide whether the light it saw was accident or meaning. Before dawn, Ravi remained awake, unable to close his eyes. From the open archway, he could see the ledge across the gorge, or where it had been. Nothing remained. Only a pale scar on the cliff, smoothed by wind, as if the mountain had erased evidence of mercy just as carefully as it had concealed it. He whispered, half prayer, half disbelief, "You really held us." In that whisper echoed not only his voice but the voices of 80 others breathing somewhere behind him, alive, suspended between disaster and devotion, each certain of one truth: in the darkness they had been carried. That night, the monastery slept, but the mountain did not. Its silence kept account, not of miracles, but of gratitude. By midday, helicopters thudded above the clouds, circling the rocky labyrinth where the monastery hid. The echo of their blades startled the calm that had settled overnight. When search teams finally spotted the saffron flags waving from the courtyard, the world below learned what it had dared to hope: 81 people were alive. The rescue began with methodical noise, radios crackling, ropes tossed from cliffs, names shouted into wind. The spiritual silence of the monastery gave way to the mechanical rhythm of survival. For the first time since the fall, cameras appeared. And with cameras came disbelief. Holy stillness replaced by the blur of human systems. Doctors' voices replaced prayers. Reporters filmed faces too exhausted to speak words they would later spend years repeating. Ravi Joshi stands at the edge of the courtyard, his jacket torn, his hands raw from climbing. He watches the monks bow briefly to the rescuers, then retreat, uninterested in recognition. The abbot's face shows the calm of someone familiar with miracles yet untouched by their noise. When the first helicopter lifts off with the children, snow flurries scatter through the air, thrown upward by its force. The valley below blazes in the afternoon sun, revealing, for the first time, the full abyss they escaped. From above, the sight of the fall looks even more impossible, a narrow stripe of stone where no geologist could ever explain traction or balance. That image would later fill television screens across the world. Scientists from Delhi called it a rare convergence of atmospheric drag and mineral structure. An engineer insisted the ledge had simply been at the perfect angle to catch the bus. Others disagreed. There was no ledge on pre-existing topographical maps. Satellite photos before the accident showed only air. Yet reason demanded an answer, and the mind will always find one. The survivors didn't argue. Their memory was enough. When microphones caught their trembling voices, they spoke not of physics but of presence, of the humming air, the hand of light, the statue, and the monks who appeared as if summoned. Some reporters smiled politely, jotting down notes labeled collective hallucination. Faith does not vanish when facts arrive. It simply moves deeper underground, where logic cannot mine. Ravi refused every interview at first. When finally cornered by a journalist who asked, "Do you believe it was divine intervention?" his answer was simple. "I believe we were not alone." In that statement lay a truth broad enough to hold every interpretation: grace, coincidence, miracle, destiny. He gave no more words and walked away, leaving the crowd of cameras blinking in windlight that made everything look more fragile than it should. Days later, the monastery returned to quiet. The monks resumed their routines, chanting over the valley each morning as they had before. They asked for no reward, offered no explanation, and refused permanent repairs to the rope bridge. "Let the path form when needed," the abbot said, "and vanish when its work is done." Back in Rishikesh, the rescued pilgrims lit candles along the riverbanks. Thousands gathered with them. Even those who doubted still came, drawn by a hunger that news coverage could not fill. Across the water, lamps floated downstream, each light a question sailing into the dark. Ravi Joshi stood among them, hat pulled low. He dropped one small clay lamp into the current, whispering prayers that had no name. As the flame drifted out, its reflection broke into hundreds of smaller sparks, scattering across the water like stars. Some people seek miracles to prove belief. Others receive them only to learn that belief was never absent. Between explanation and mystery, truth often walks a bridge as narrow and as infinite as the one that saved them. Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade into memory. What had begun as a headline, "Bus falls from cliff, all survive," gradually transformed into something larger, something that could not be reduced to statistics or relief. It became a mirror reflecting what people most wanted to believe about the invisible forces that still move through the world. Across India, voices disagreed passionately on what had truly happened in Ghats Valley. Journalists revisited the site by helicopter, reporting with measured skepticism that the impossible ledge had vanished entirely. Geologists examined satellite imagery and confirmed that no such platform existed on previous surveys. The stone, they said, must have eroded rapidly after the rescue, though none could explain how or why. Skeptics accused the media of feeding superstition in a rational age. Believers called the disappearance divine confirmation that the mountain had served its purpose and closed the chapter. Every miracle echoes further than its witnesses. What begins in stone ends in hearts, argued about on screens and whispered about in prayer. Truth, in such moments, becomes less a matter of proof and more a question of what people need to keep living. In small villages far from the urban debates, people who had never traveled beyond their districts spoke of the event with passion and ownership. Tea workers paused their labor to recount how the mountain held them. Bus drivers, before turning their ignition keys each morning, began lighting small sticks of incense on their dashboards, murmuring blessings for safe passage. Children in rural schools drew sketches of light encircling falling buses in their notebooks. Artwork made of both fear and faith passed between friends like sacred diagrams. The pilgrims themselves, now scattered back to their homes across northern India, carried pieces of the valley with them in ways both visible and invisible. Some wore prayer threads tied at the monastery. Others simply carried silence in their eyes, the kind that comes after witnessing something the mind cannot fully categorize. One woman, Meera Das, transformed her modest roadside tea stall outside Haridwar into a free food counter for travelers. Her sign, hand-painted in Hindi and English, read simply, "Fed by grace, feeding by choice." When asked why she did this, she answered quietly, "If we were fed from nothing on that mountain, how can I charge for what I have?" Her hands, once trembling with trauma in the days after the fall, now moved with quiet certainty as she poured chai and served rice to strangers who might never know her story. Another survivor, a retired schoolteacher named Gopal, began organizing evening prayer walks along the banks of the Ganges. Every full moon, he gathered whoever wished to come, believers, doubters, the curious, and led them in silence along the water's edge, each person carrying a small clay lamp. He called these gatherings walks for the waiting, for those still hoping to feel seen by heaven. To some, he became a symbol of grace reborn. To himself, he was simply obeying gratitude, the only language left after words failed. The monks of the hidden pass, meanwhile, returned to near anonymity, their monastery once again veiled by mist and time. Tourists occasionally found the ancient structure after days of arduous hiking, bearing offerings of fruit, incense, and cameras. The monks accepted the offerings with bows but refused any photographs or recordings. "Light cannot be captured," one told a documentary crew in broken English before turning away, his saffron robe disappearing into shadow. They kept their focus on the same horizon from which the bus had fallen, chanting the sutras of compassion each dawn for all travelers still on dangerous roads. Meanwhile, in the cities, urban talk shows dissected the event nightly. Some guests mocked the very idea of a miracle in a scientific age, calling it mass hysteria amplified by social media. Others claimed it proved the gods had not abandoned the modern world, that divinity still interrupted physics when mercy demanded it. Through all the arguments, heated, cynical, passionate, footage of the survivors persisted on screens, faces caught between fear and awe, eyes blinking under the harsh lights of helicopters. No statistic, no expert analysis could dilute that expression, the unmistakable look of people who had seen death hesitate. Ravi Joshi stayed silent through it all. He declined interviews, ignored calls from producers, and returned quietly to driving smaller routes along the safe, flat roads of the plains where the earth held no cliffs. Each morning, before releasing the brakes of whichever vehicle he piloted that day, he would touch the steering wheel once with his right hand and whisper something only he could hear, half prayer, half promise. Passengers who rode with him often spoke later of an uncanny calm about the man, as if storms and accidents no longer recognized him, as if he had become invisible to disaster. Markets bustling with color, temples ringing evening bells, buses humming along highways while far above them the Himalayan cliffs still brood under eternal mist. Faith does not spread through sermons alone, it spreads through restored gentleness. It travels in the hands of a woman pouring tea, in the silence of a man who no longer fears the road, in the lamps floating down a river that has carried prayers for millennia. One evening, as Ravi parked his vehicle near the river's edge in Rishikesh, he noticed a small clay lamp floating downstream. Its flame quivered but never went out, even as currents turned faster toward unseen depths. He followed it with his eyes until twilight blurred it into the first stars rising above the water, realizing then that perhaps miracles travel the same way, not in the grand retelling, but in the quiet persistence of light refusing to drown, small and stubborn and utterly alive. Ripples may fade from the surface, but the water remembers. What happened in Got's Valley became less a question of proof and more a movement of hearts returning, slowly and carefully, toward belief. 8 months after the fall, the mountains were green again. The monsoon had come and gone, breathing new life into every scar where stone once broke and reformed. Rivers ran loud with snowmelt, wildflowers carpeted slopes that had been gray with dust. For those who had fallen and survived, time had dulled panic but sharpened remembrance. A small convoy wound along the same serpentine road where everything had changed. A dozen jeeps carrying the survivors, a few rescue workers who had participated in the aftermath, and several local officials. News cameras trailed behind this time, not for spectacle but to record gratitude. No one spoke loudly. Each curve of the road felt holy, each blind turn a memory of what might have been. Ravi Joshi drove once more, but not as a hired driver. He led the way now, requested by everyone to guide them safely to the point from which they had plummeted into fog and fate. The steering wheel grumbled beneath his hand, familiar and forgiving. No music played in his vehicle, only the low hum of tires against fresh asphalt and the distant chants of temple bells echoing from valleys miles away. When they reached the stretch known as Got's Pass, silence descended over the group like a held breath. The government had reinforced the guardrails with fresh steel painted bright yellow. New asphalt glistened where the old road had crumbled. Warning signs in Hindi, English, and several regional languages now dotted the cliffs, cautioning drivers of sharp turns and sudden fog. Yet beneath all the modern improvements, the smell of wet stone and pine carried the same ancient memory, the scent of the day they should have died. The convoy stopped. One by one, the survivors stepped out onto the shoulder and approached the overlook where mist still floated like slow breath over sleeping depths. There was no longer any visible ledge. Where the bus had rested for 2 impossible days, the cliff ran clean again, washed smooth by rain and time, unmarked except for ribbons of moss glowing faintly green in afternoon sunlight. A few of them gasped softly, hands rising to cover mouths. Some cried with quiet dignity, tears falling without shame. Others pressed palms together in prayer, lips moving in languages older than nations. The absence itself felt sacred, proof that what once held them had returned to mystery, dissolved like mist into the mountain's memory. Time had erased the evidence but not the echo. The ground that had caught them existed now only in the realm between fact and faith, and perhaps that is where all true salvation lives. Monks from the hidden monastery were waiting nearby. They had walked down hours earlier, carrying simple prayer flags tied to bamboo poles, their saffron robes bright against the gray stone. When the survivors approached, the abbot bowed slowly and handed Ravi a small brass plate engraved with Sanskrit script. No translation was offered. The metal shone dully, as if it had traveled through both heaven and dust to arrive at this moment. Together, survivors and monks climbed a few meters down the slope to where a new viewing platform had been built by the local government, a simple wooden structure anchored into rock. There, with wind whistling sharp and cold across ravines that swallowed sound, they fixed the plate onto the cliff face with bolts and reverence. Its inscription, worn smooth at the edges as if already ancient, read simply, "Here we fell and were caught." No date, no names, no explanation, just truth. After the dedication, the monks began a low chant, nothing theatrical, a single tone that rose and descended like the breathing of the earth itself. The sound intertwined with the wind until it became impossible to tell which was prayer and which was mountain. For a long, suspended moment, everyone stood motionless, united not by belief or disbelief, but by awe, the kind that silences argument and opens the chest to something larger than the self. Ravi knelt on the damp earth. His hands trembled as he pressed his forehead to the cold stone, his breath fogging against rock. Images flooded back unbidden. Fog, light, trembling hands, the stillness of that levitating bus suspended between worlds. "Thank you," he whispered, once in Hindi, once in English, then once more in silence. None of the languages felt adequate. Gratitude, he realized, was a feeling too vast for words. When he stood again, a fragment of marigold garland, left earlier by another pilgrim as a memorial, lifted suddenly on an unexpected breeze. Instead of tumbling down into the abyss, it spiraled upward, caught in a thermal current rising invisibly from the valley below. The others watched, transfixed and silent, as the orange petals climbed higher and higher, dissolving finally into brightness and sky. Some journeys end where they began, not to repeat but to remind. In God's valley, the road no longer frightened them. It blessed them. And for the first time, the mountain silence felt complete, because it no longer needed to prove anything at all. The year was drawing toward its final season when God's valley quieted again. Winter approached softly, dusting the highest peaks with fresh snow. The rains had softened the cliffs, filling cracks with moss and wildflowers that would sleep until spring. The repaired guardrails gleamed newly painted along the pass. Traffic resumed its cautious rhythm, drivers unaware that the asphalt beneath their wheels carried the memory of a day when the world had briefly paused to witness the impossible. For the survivors, life had resumed its ordinary rhythms, yet every sound, rain drumming on tin roofs, thunder rolling above distant hills, the hiss of tires against wet gravel, carried within it a shadow of that morning when gravity forgot them and mercy intervened. They lived differently now, not dramatically, but deeply. Small kindnesses replaced old habits. Silence became less lonely. Faith, for many, shifted from concept to companionship. Ravi Joshi still drove buses, though never the mountain routes. He worked now on the plains, where horizons stretched flat and forgiving, where the worst danger was boredom, not death. Passengers trusted him instinctively. There was something steady about the man, a calm that radiated from his hands on the wheel. He spoke little during journeys, but he listened, to people's small worries, their unspoken hopes, and in that listening, he found the meaning that words had stolen from him. Each year, on the anniversary of the fall, the survivors gathered near the riverbanks in Rishikesh. They brought no banners, no speeches, no media. Some came barefoot, some carried handmade lamps of clay. Together, they placed the lamps in the water, one fragile flame for each life spared. The glow floated downstream in quiet procession, their reflections trembling like living prayers across the current, traveling toward the sea that remembers all rivers. Time does not erase miracles, it translates them. What once shattered logic becomes a story told to children at dusk, passed down until no one remembers if it was real or parable. And stories, when believed, can hold the world upright for another day. Among the group, Mira Das continued her vow of kindness. Her roadside canteen still served free meals to any traveler who stopped, a living tribute to the mountain's mercy. When thanked, she said only, "We are all sustained by hands we never see." Her voice carried no bitterness for the son she had lost years before the accident, only gratitude for the breath she still drew. Reporters no longer chased their words, but occasionally a curious pilgrim, hearing rumors, would visit the hidden monastery. They found the same saffron-robed monks tending herb gardens, repairing ancient woodwork, praying beside the cliffs at sunrise and sunset. When asked if they remembered the night of the falling bus, one smiled faintly, eyes crinkling with age and patience. "It was never ours to remember," he said. "It was the mountains." The monastery itself changed subtly with the seasons. At sunset, when fog drifted low through the gorges, a pale glow often shimmered faintly above the opposite ridge. Seen by locals who no longer questioned it, ignored by skeptics who refused it, unrecorded by any technology yet felt by those still seeking hope in improbable places. One evening, Ravi climbed the road alone. He reached the overlook as stars unfolded above the peaks, sharp and cold in the thinning air. The wind carried the same scent of pine, wet stone, and something else, something he could only describe as presence. He closed his eyes, not to pray this time, but simply to listen. In that stillness, he heard the faint ringing of a bell across the valley, a sound too high and gentle to be mechanical, too clear to be imagination. It came from somewhere deep within the mountains, from the hidden monastery perhaps, or from memory itself folding into the present. The sound lasted only a heartbeat, then dissolved into the rhythm of wind moving through unseen places. He smiled quietly. Somewhere inside, the ache that had followed him since the crash eased, not because he finally understood what had saved them, but because he no longer needed to. Understanding, he realized, was a luxury. Gratitude was enough. The valley under moonlight, mist flowing like silk, lamps floating in distant rivers, an old blue bus rusting peacefully in a salvage yard miles away, its frame bent but unbroken. The world continuing, as it always does, carrying within it hints of what it once witnessed, scars that glow faintly when the light is right. Maybe miracles aren't interruptions of nature, the voice reflects. Maybe they are its reminders, that life itself, fragile and inexplicable, suspended between breath and stillness, has always been the greatest suspension of gravity we will ever know. The camera lingers on Ravi one last time. He turns slowly from the abyss, walking toward the faint glow of a roadside shrine where a single candle burns against the dark. A new dawn bleeds pale gold across the horizon, soft as forgiveness. The bus fell. The mountain caught it. And long after both were gone, washed away by rain and time and argument, the light remained, quiet, patient, waiting for the next soul brave enough to believe.